And we're going to set up a mask by using this feature around our
genitalia.
Yes. Or maybe not.
Or whatever you want to pixelate, for whatever reason.
In this episode of The Source, we're going to be talking about Elephant's Dream, the first open source movie. We're also going to have the third in our series of Cinelerra tutorials. This one's all about the effects. From Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China, I'm Newcomb, and you're watching The Source. This episode of The Source is not brought to you by...
Hello, I'm a Mac.
I'm a PC.
And I'm Linux. Well, fancy pants. New outfits, huh?
I figured I'd give myself a new look. I call this Vista Leopard.
Oh, thank you. Ooh, fits nicely.
What's that?
I keep up with the latest trends.
And people just share that stuff with you?
All the time.
Wish I had a jacket like that.
It might work on you.
I'll probably wear this for another 6 or 7 years.
Vinyl?
Pleather.
Nice.
And not by...
And now here's Bambi and the boys presenting the fabulous new drink, Balls!
You'll hit the sky on a natural high, so go out and buy some balls. You'll take a trip that's totally hip, if only you'd sip some balls. High energy from guarana berries, you'll swim up waterfalls. It's diabolic, you'll want to frolic, non-alcoholic balls. Go out and grab some balls. He's got you.
Buy the balls!
She's got you.
Buy the balls!
They've got you.
Buy the balls!
Whole world's got you.
Buy the balls!
Balls is a refreshing energy-packed drink for the cool consumer on the go. Feeling tired? Run down? Hey, swig some balls and dance all night.
Whoever thought I'd want blue balls?
I'll take two.
Hi, I'm Newcomb, and you're watching The Source. The Source is an open source video podcast all about open source software. It's also made entirely with open source software. Now, if you've seen the show before, you might be wondering one thing, well, why we haven't had an episode in so long. There's really three answers for that. The first one is that you may have noticed by the opening of the show that I actually was able to take a trip to China along with my wife, and we had a great time, but that ate up a little bit of our time in between episodes. The other thing that happened was we released a weekly audio podcast called Open News. And Open News is news entirely about open source. I felt that there was a need for an audio podcast that just dealt with open source news and not mixed in with other tech news. It's a short podcast, about 10-15 minutes long. We do all the latest open source news stories for the week. We also do a roundup of all of the releases throughout the past week. Any open source software that had a major release, we try to let you know about that. And we also do a tip of the week, and perhaps we'll start doing some commentary along the way as well. So if you want to check out that show, you can head over to opennewsshow.org. So the third thing that happened in the mix here is that my co-host previously, Brian Burgess, has moved on to Kansas City. So we'll take a minute here to hear a brief word from Brian. So Brian, not hosting the show with me today. Why don't you tell our wonderful viewers what's going on?
Well, it's hard to host the show when you're 11 hours away. I've relocated from Cincinnati to Kansas City. It's a wonderful job opportunity, one of those jobs that you'd like to get up for every morning. And I strongly recommend it for those of you who are doing things that you hate to quit that and find something that you love. And,
are you saying that you hated hosting the show with me?
I hated hosting The Source. No,
that was not your job.
That wasn't my job. That was just a fun thing to do on the side. But anyway, things weren't all that fun here in Cincinnati. Although I love Cincinnati and I do consider it home, I'll be in Kansas City for the next couple of years. So
cool. New job. Fun times. Who knows? We may see you on The Source again sometime.
Oh, we'll see you from time to time. I'll still pop in. Like I said, Cincinnati is home, and it always will be. So, although unless we move to Hawaii or something down the road, then that'll become home. You'll always trade up. So Kansas City is not home, but it's nice. It's a nice town. I strongly recommend it. And if you're in Kansas City watching The Source, by all means look me up. Brian J. Burgess at, the source dot whatever. What's our email address?
The Source Fans.
The Source Fans.
At
Just shoot me an
gmail.com.
email that way.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.
And thanks to Aaron for driving me to the airport this morning at this ungodly hour.
Yeah. All right.
Heading back. See ya.
So there you have it, right from the horse's mouth. Brian has moved on to Kansas City, and he still comes back every other weekend or so to visit his family until they can all move out there. So still get to see him occasionally, but he won't be able to be on the show anymore. So that's the third reason that there hasn't been an episode in almost 5 months now. So we did want to we have some things that we recorded, we wanted to get them out, and perhaps we'll take a little bit different approach if I'm doing this by myself for a while. Perhaps the episodes will be a little shorter, a little bit more focused, which is probably a good thing anyway. So now let's go ahead and get right to the poll. There was a poll on the website. I have an old 500 megahertz server, which used to be the web server for thesourceshow.org, and that's been freed up since I've gotten some new hardware. So I put a poll out asking you, the audience, what I should do with that old server. And a lot of you responded. Over 250 people responded to the poll. So I wanted to go over that, and we'll see what came out on top. There were a number of categories I listed on the poll. Coming in last place with 14% was a MAME console. 16% would like me to take that and turn it into an Asterisk server. Of course, we've talked about Asterisk a lot on previous episodes. Asterisk is the open source voice over IP server that you can set up and do all kinds of crazy things with. So 16% of you voted for Asterisk. 17% voted for a router or a firewall. The two kind of go hand in hand, or can go hand in hand. So that was a pretty good option. Then there was two that tied for first place, and one was a Myth TV box, very popular, and a Tor server. And they both tied with 24%. However, Myth TV won out by one vote, and so Myth TV tops the list of what I should do with my old 500 megahertz server. Now what I'm going to do with the results of that poll is I'm going to take two of the things on there. The one that you, the viewer, voted for, which was Myth TV. We'll have an upcoming segment on Myth TV, how to install it, how to get running. There's others on the web, but perhaps we'll take a little bit different angle than they have. And the other thing I thought I would do is take my personal favorite, although it was the bottom of the choices, a MAME console, and put together a MAME box. Now, when I talk about a MAME console, I'm really not talking about just taking MAME or the multiple arcade machine emulator and having that running on a PC. That's fairly easy to do. What I'm talking about is taking that 500 megahertz server, putting it inside the belly of a fully sized arcade machine, an arcade console built out of plywood and metal and arcade buttons and joysticks and all the rest, and getting that up and running, and putting that in the basement for the kids to play with, and of course all of the old fogies like myself who come over and want to play Pac-Man and Donkey Kong as well. So perhaps I'll do a segment on that in an upcoming episode as well. Okay, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get right into today's segments. We have two of them for you. The first one is an interview with Bassam Kurdali of the Blender Project, and he's going to be talking about Project Orange and Elephant's Dream, the first open source movie. we had the opportunity to sit down and talk to him. Elephant Stream, of course, came out about a year ago. It was done entirely with Blender, which is an open source project and really quite an incredible feat. So we sat down and talked to him, and that'll be our first segment. And then from there we'll go right into Cinelerra tutorial number 3. We've been doing a series of Cinelerra tutorials, and that of course is the open source software that we use to create this podcast. And so in tutorial number 3 we'll be talking all about effects. So without further ado, here is Bassam Kurdali and The Elephant's Dream. If you're involved at all or interested in open source, and unless you've been living under a rock for the past few months, you've probably heard about Elephant's Dream, the first open source movie. With me today, I have Bassam Kurdali. Am I saying that right, Bassam?
Yes, you are.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
And you are with the Blender project, right?
So to speak, yes.
So to speak. Well, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, what is your role then with the Blender project?
Well, the Blender project is maybe not unique, but at least strongly noted by the collaboration between the artists and users of the software and with the developers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually not a developer for the Blender Foundation. I'm a user of Blender, not one of the artist community. Blender's history had started out in a company where developers and artists were working together and doing software development in tandem, and so things haven't changed that much during the open source era. And recently, with the Orange project, we had the opportunity to collaborate as sort of an ad hoc studio, where we had a group of 6 artists working together with the main developer of the software, Tan, and with the rest of the development team via IRC, making a movie and working on enhancing the software and figuring out what we needed to do to get it to the level that we could actually achieve that production with Blender.
Yeah, so this is actually something interesting to me because I think that a lot of times something that's missing from a lot of open source efforts is artistry. You know, a lot of time, if you look at what Apple's doing with some of their projects, it seems that they really focus on how well something looks. You know, it's got to look really good, and a lot of times that's missing from the open source side or from the Linux side. So I think it's really interesting that actually the Blender project has really always been, or seems to have always been, a combination of efforts between the artists and the developers.
That's a lot to do with the fact that the main developer, Tan, started out as an artist and not as a programmer. That was his college education, I guess.
Wow.
And he came to developing software via circuitous route, pretty much. So.
Well, tell us, before we get into, you mentioned Project Orange, before we get into that, can you give us for anyone that hasn't heard of it, I'm sure there's a few people that haven't heard of Blender. I mean, what is Blender? What does it do?
Well, Blender is a 3D graphics and animation suite. It's a program that is targeted at generating 3D graphics content. You can certainly make animations and movies such as Elephant's Dream.
Mm-hmm.
You can also make interactive content with Blender. Many people use it to make content for games, and indeed you can even make interactive content within Blender because there's a built-in game engine that's pretty good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So as far as Blender is concerned, what makes Blender different from other applications? There's a lot of other 3D tools out there that people can use. What's different about Blender? What makes Blender different?
Well, the first and biggest difference is that it's an open source application, and it's the only open source application that has the scope and level of development that makes it a capable tool compared to software as Max or Maya or Lightwave. There are other open source 3D applications, but those are either very specific, i.e. they're just a modeler, or they're just doing one specific task, or they're applications that are fairly early in their level of development, and you can do some things with them, but you can't really depend on them for a production. Blender, on the other hand, started out as an in-house tool for a company, and so it's been characterized throughout its history as being heavily used in production by one group or another, and so it kind of has a unique niche in the open source toolkit in that way.
So it actually Blender started out not as an open source project then?
That's correct.
And became open source over time.
Yeah.
How did that? Do you have any information on how that happened? I mean, how did that actually occur?
It's an interesting history. It started out, as I mentioned earlier, as an in-house tool for a multimedia company, and hence the tight relationship between the artists and the programmers who are working at the same company. And at some point they decided to release this tool for free on the net, and the software sort of lasted through several companies, and eventually when the last one went out of business, the lead developer Tan and the online community that had been using Blender made a deal with the venture capitalists, the people who had the money invested in that company, that to buy back the sources for, I think, 100,000 euros or something like that.
Wow.
And the money was raised via online contributions from the community, and I think within 2 or 3 months Blender became an open source project.
Wow, that's great. That's amazing that they were able to raise that much capital, from the community.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of users and many enthusiastic ones as well, and maybe there were a few larger donations in there. I'm not really sure of the details, but I think it was mostly community money that ended up.
Wow, so that's really exciting. Blender seems like an awesome project, and I would encourage anyone that's interested to go to blender.org and definitely check it out. But let's talk a little bit now about Elephant's Dream. Why did Elephant's Dream is talked about as an open source movie, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, why did the people that are involved in the Blender project and others decide to make Elephant's Dream an open source movie?
Well, it's a complex question, I guess. There's several different answers for that. From the perspective of the software, of the Blender developers, one of the issues with getting Blender into production, into getting more people comfortable with the idea of using Blender for a production, would be kind of proving that. And the best proof would be to do a project like Elephant's Dream, and make those production files available, make the pipeline completely open to people, so you can really tell exactly how it was done and sort of remove any of that doubt or confusion. From our perspective, as the artist in the project, it was both an opportunity to make an interesting short that we would like to do, and also we felt that the open aspect of the movie had a certain kind of interest to it, because I think you can make something, anything you want, a movie or a book or whatever, and there's kind of two components to how that becomes useful culturally. One is just the first first effect or the first time it's viewed as itself, and that's interesting. But the secondary kind of influence is perhaps how it can influence other people to do different things, how people build on that later on. And in this context, we felt that we could make something that really stressed heavily that sort of secondary effect as being the important one. Making it an open movie kind of amplifies that a lot, if you will, and makes it even more possible for for people to do different things with it. We hope that people will use the production files for their own work or tell their own stories with them. I do know so far that people have done remixes of the video and audio, and people have been using the production files on a more limited basis, which is also really cool to see that people can learn from these files.
Right. Now you mentioned that the production files, those are available online?
Yes, that's correct. They're available online. If you go to elephantstream.org, you can find various links for how to download them. They're a pretty hefty download, especially if you want to download everything.
Right.
They're also available on the DVD that we distributed, which maybe for people who are not having huge internet connections, it might be a better option for them.
Right.
But yeah, they're available through both means.
Great. Well, I know that I've got a clip here ready of Elephant Stream. We're going to play just the first little bit of it. I mean, what are we going to see here in this clip?
The very first part of the movie is basically it's kind of like the prologue or the epilogue at the end. It's basically Prug remembering the kind of the events of the movie, and so the first thing you see is this sort of trip down memory lane, and Prug is trying to recall what happened, with him and his friend,
Okay. And, well, let's.
So that's basically it.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a look.
At the left we can see at the right we can see the hat snarlers. Everything is safe, perfectly safe. Emo? What's that? Are you hurt? I don't think so. You? I'm okay. Get up. Emo, it's not safe here. Let's go. What's next? You'll see. You'll see. Emo, this way. Follow me! him out!
All right, great. That's really exciting stuff. So, okay, right off the bat, it looks like this must have been incredibly difficult to make. Can you describe the process and how difficult it was to make Elephant's Dream?
Sure. And yeah, it was difficult to make. We had initially a 6-month production time to make the movie. It ended up being 7. When we started out, we had our first few meetings. We started talking about the story concept, and we decided early on that we would have a professional scriptwriter actually write the script for us, since none of us were, too big on writing, I guess. And we did hire somebody, and about a week before we were about to start production, we found that our writer had quit. And
no.
so we had to find another writer during the period that we were supposed to be in production with the script. And so we spent about 3 months where we were doing character concepts and then actually modeling and rigging the characters, while the writer was developing the script and passing back and forth different versions and revisions of it. And we would, at certain points, start making animatics of different stages of that and use that for feedback. So we spent about 3 months in which we made about 3 different 3D animatics in Blender that were kind of like non-animated, blocky, almost like storyboards but moving. And we kept on cutting it down each time. And I think our final version, the script went from being something like 12 pages to 1 as far as dialogue was concerned.
Wow.
And we cut down the number of scenes, and by this point we had spent 3 months and we had to actually start production. For the first period of production, which was most of the 3 months that we had left, we were working on principal character animation. And we basically had sort of a rough goal that each animator would do a shot a day, which typically involved coming into the studio around 10, which is when we normally started, and working until midnight and sometimes beyond midnight, trying to get that shot off. And sometimes, running longer on some shots. For instance, there's some difficult shots in there that took an animator about a week to actually finish.
Wow.
And the result of all of that is that we got to the end of our period and we had barely anything rendered. And so the lighting, texturing, and rendering crew kind of took over in that last extra month we had. And they actually put in, and keep in mind that some of them actually were animating already during the first 3 months, because people kind of swapped hats a lot during the project. And they probably put in longer hours doing that so they could actually get the movie rendered in a month than we did earlier doing the animation. And so there was many staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning, bleary-eyed kind of people in the studio.
Wow. Now, did you guys work all together, or were you spread out remotely? Were you all in the same physical location?
We were mostly in the same physical location. We had a building sponsored, a room rather sponsored in a building in Amsterdam by Montevideo, which is a film and video arts institute that sponsors artists to do kind of artist in residence projects. And so ours was kind of a big artist in residence project for them. And so we had a big room in their building that we used as a studio, and it was pretty much 6 people in that room working for the duration of the project.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Awesome. Now this is our audience is primarily a lot of geeks, so they're going to want to know what kind of hardware and equipment did you use to get this done?
Yeah, let's see. We had in the studio we had, I think, 4 Linux machines and 2 Macs. The Macs were, I think, Apple G5s, Power Mac G5s that were, I don't know, I think they're about 2 gigahertz processors and running OS 10, and they had Apple Cinema displays on top with like 23-inch screens.
Right, nice.
The Linux PCs we put together ourselves. They're just custom-built boxes. They had AMD 64 X2 processors in them, I think 4600 pluses.
Excellent.
They had NVIDIA 6600 graphics cards in them. We kind of cheaped out on the graphics cards a little bit, but it was okay for what we were doing. And we had nice Samsung SyncMaster screens. They're 24-inch flat screen LCDs. That were really, really nice to work on. In addition, we borrowed little 17 and 15-inch Dell monitors from Montevideo, so we had a dual monitor set up on every computer.
Excellent.
We also had one Sun workstation. It was a dual Opteron machine with a lot of memory and a Quadro graphics card in it.
Excellent. Well, I work for Sun, so I'm glad to hear that.
Cool. Yeah, they donated that machine, actually.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wow. Well, it sounds like you didn't skimp on the CPU cycles, that's for sure. And I bet you needed all of those to get a lot of that work done.
Right. Well, we actually, those machines were our work machines, our workstations, and we did test renders on them. But for actually rendering out the movie, we had the Bowie State University in the United States donated cycles on their. They have a big cluster of G5 servers.
Excellent.
Like a 250 CPU cluster, I think.
Wow.
Or 250 node cluster. I think they dual processors on each node, and so we did the rendering off-site. Actually.
Wow.
So.
And how long did it take to render the final project?
We initially tried to keep each shot to render in under 20 minutes per frame on a single note. Now, this didn't actually work for every shot in the movie. Some shots actually rendered faster, but then there were a lot that rendered slower. I think the slowest was taking a little bit over 2 hours per frame per node.
Right.
So I put that all together into a 24 frame per second, 10-minute movie, and you can come up with an estimate of how long it took. And plus
amazing.
we had a lot. Yeah. Plus we had a lot of re-renders. Sometimes we did things and they came back and there was a mistake or things were wrong.
And actually, that's not too bad. People that aren't familiar with graphics work and rendering, it could be a lot worse. I know, like I heard that I think it was the Cars. The Disney movie, they were working on something crazy like 16-hour per frame renders or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just ridiculously long time to actually render.
Yeah, and they have massive amounts of horsepower and also much more time to do it on. We really stayed away from expensive rendering options. I mean, it could have been much slower to render, but we avoid ray tracing as much as possible in the movie.
Right.
We avoided using any kind of global lighting effects or even global lighting fakes like ambient occlusion that would still end up taking up too much time per frame. And the look of the movie was achieved via very, very careful lighting. So there are lots of just normal shadow buffer lamps all throughout the scene, and negative lamps and all sorts of tricks to make shadows and occlusion kind of start to mimic real-world lighting and bounce lighting and things like that.
Right. Well, the ultimate effect obviously came out fantastic. I mean, everyone that I've talked to has been amazed that such a great piece of work could be created from a tool that you can go out on the internet and download for free.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a great success. So the next question is, when is the next open source movie coming out? Are you guys planning a sequel, or what should we expect next?
Well, I'm actually not sure myself. I know that Tan has something up his sleeve. He's a great organizer, and he's been working behind the scenes on getting the funds and the sort of setup ready for the next Orange project. I'm pretty sure it'll be a movie. There are a lot of people on the net who want to have an Orange game or something like that.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that it's going to be a movie. But I don't really know beyond that any details. I don't know if it's going to be the same team or a different team or a mix of the two things, and I don't know. I don't know exactly any details about that. I know that some of the artists on the team are working on their own sort of personal projects on smaller scope. Andy, who's the art director for Orange, is doing something of an abstract animation piece that is kind of in keeping with his artistic directions. And Basse, who was one of the lead artists on the team, is a great guy, great painter actually, and a great animator and modeler too. And he's working on something that he won't tell anyone anything about, except that it's a mixture of 2D and 3D graphics, and he thinks it'll be bad, but I don't believe him really. But we'll see about that.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think that goes to one of the what may have been one of the goals, I'm sure it was, of the project, which is to just show people that what the tool is capable of doing, and getting some publicity around this open source project. So I'm just wondering, since it's been a few months now since the movie's been released. I mean, what kind of feedback have you been getting, both from the community and also from professional animators?
Well, from professionals, it's been largely a good response. A lot of people that I've talked to have been kind of surprised that Blender had come so far, or that it was capable of this type of animation. I talked to a lot of people, especially at SIGGRAPH, where we had an open source pavilion, and we talked to different artists from different companies and who were working on different types of software, like Maya, for instance. And we were just talking about, kind of showing them what we did and doing a little bit of feature-by-feature comparison. And it was largely a positive response, both for the movie and for the fact that, hey, you can actually do maybe 80% or 90% of what you could do in Maya in Blender. And it's often the case that when you have a big feature-filled software, you don't always use all the features all the time.
Right.
So there's a core that you need, basically, and the nice thing is that that core is in Blender, and also a lot of the candy on top is also there, actually.
Right.
So that was pretty good. On the community side, we had both positive and negative feedback. The positive side, I think, is that I think everybody liked the look of the movie, which is good, and people critique the animation quite a bit, which I think is fair. We knew going in that the animation wouldn't be Pixar quality or anything like that yet, due to two factors. One was that we weren't as good animators as Pixar animators to begin with,
Sure.
and our time constraints were such that we couldn't really polish things off even to our own liking. We had to, cut and move on to the next one, or we wouldn't finish. And so we understand that, but really good animation takes a can take a long time of tweaking and refinement, and most of the shots didn't really get that. They get kind of blocked out, and okay, it's good enough. Move on to the next shot.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So that's that. As far as the story is concerned, we also got mixed reactions. Some people loved it. The people who like more abstract movies or art movies, things that leave you with some questions or some work to do, an interpretation of what you've seen. People who like that enjoyed the story, and they enjoyed the movie quite a bit. Some people were expecting more of a straightforward type movie where you can watch it very passively and just sort of get it and be amused or entertained in some way.
More like a traditional Disney movie, a Finding Nemo or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually. But it just didn't end up being the type of movie that we wanted to make. And also, we talked about it for a bit, and we thought, well, it's an open movie. And do we really want to give people something that's, in terms of its story, closed? Or do we want to give people something that has more of a suggestive story, that maybe will spark little ideas in people's heads of like what direction they would like it to be, really. Things that would kind of prod people to work on it, rather than feel like it was kind of an open and shut case and, oh, this is it. It's this little thing that you can watch and that's done, So.
Yep. Well, I definitely fall more into the abstract camp. I watch a lot of anime, and it was interesting to compare some of the things that you've done with some of the better anime stories that I've watched too. Because a lot of times with anime, they'll kind of leave you guessing a little bit as to what the meaning was, or even what the ending will be. And so I like that. So I understand exactly what you're talking about the abstract and
cool.
Yeah, definitely. So great. Well, real quickly before we wrap up, how can people get involved if they want to get involved with the Blender project, or if they want to stay tuned into what's going on with maybe the next movie project? How can they do that?
Well, to get involved with the project, as far as using it, I mean, there's just, you can download the program from blender.org, and there are many community sites, such as blenderartists.org, which is a big community forum site. There's IRC channels on Freenode, such as Blender Chat and Blender Q&A, Blender Char for character animation. There's also a good Blender news site out there called www.blendernation.com, which is just a daily news on Blender kind of site, and they post info up on all the upcoming events and software milestones and even tutorials and things like that on a daily basis.
Great.
And certainly developers probably, can find it easy to contribute to the project. I think it's a fairly open developer community, and a lot of new developers are always showing up and kind of getting into it.
So that's great. And
that side of things is easy.
And if you want to download the movie, they can go to elephantsdream.org, correct?
That's true, yeah. Great. I think it's available in various formats. I think there's also a torrent on the site, and for people who don't have the bandwidth, I think it's also available on YouTube in a very kind of lower quality, obviously.
Right. And they can also, they still order the DVD with all the extended features and the project files?
Yep, I think there are some DVDs still available. I'm not sure how many, but I think there are some still available from the Blender website.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Bassam, hey, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know we've been working at this for a while to try to get together, basically ever since the Elephant Stream came out, just about. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And Good luck with the next project.
Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
In this segment of The Source, we're going to be talking about special effects, my favorite. But first, let's review what we've talked about before.
Okay, so last time we were here, we talked about editing and the 3 different modes of editing: drag and drop,
cut and paste,
2-screen
mode.
2-screen mode. Wow, you're good.
I'm learning.
Yep, and we also talked about how important arming tracks is.
Correct.
Right in the timeline, when you're editing, you don't want to edit certain tracks. You can disarm them.
Arming and disarming.
And we also talked about some of the ways you can zoom and move the cursor around the timeline.
Correct, with the right click, middle click, left click.
So finally, in the 3rd installment of our Cinelerra tutorials, we're going to be talking about effects and how to do effects. Yes, so this is where Cinelerra really shines compared to some of the more simple editors that are out there today. Like there's the ULED editors. There's the Microsoft Movie Maker.
Movie Maker 2.
Well, Movie Maker 2. Sorry.
Probably the most common editor ever seen on YouTube.
I'm sure.
All of their special effects, by the way, are all pretty much used up on YouTube. So Cinelerra, you'll be able to do some new stuff.
We'll find some new ones. So yeah, you can really get down and dirty with Cinelerra. So let's jump right into it. The first thing that is very, very important to understand before we get into actually doing some effects is talking a little bit about keyframes. Are you familiar with keyframes at all?
Well, only insofar as I've played around with Flash and things like that. So I've seen them. I don't know what they are, though.
Okay.
I've tried to use them.
Right. So keyframes, in Cinelerra, keyframes are represented on the timeline as small lines that run through the timeline. And keyframes correspond to various things. For example, audio, the most common thing in audio is the level of audio, right? So whether it's loud, quiet, you can adjust that. And you can set keyframes to, instead of adjusting the level of the audio across the whole timeline, you can set keyframes to only adjust the level of audio at certain periods of time. Okay. So for example, let's say you wanted to fade a track out. You've got a track and it's going on too long and you want to actually fade the audio of that track out early. What you can do is you can set a baseline keyframe, right, at one level, and then you can set another keyframe at a very low level further down, and what will happen is the track, you'll actually see it will actually curve off and go down to wherever that other level is.
Okay.
So keyframes are a way to adjust the levels of certain things, but it's not just for audio levels or volume. Keyframes are also used for the positioning of the video on the screen. So in other words, if you wanted to zoom in or zoom out on a particular track, you can do that with keyframes. Keyframes help you do that. So if you think of keyframes, the best way to think about it is in terms of a string. So if you take a string on a board and you have points or tacks or something on the board, and you run the string along the tacks, it's going to make a certain curve, right, depending on where you put the tacks on the board. That's the best way to think about what keyframes do in your video.
All right.
So after that horrible description, I'm sure someone has a better one somewhere.
Well, let's take a look.
Let's take a look at how keyframes work. So in our first example, we talked about audio levels, volume levels on audio, right?
Right.
So in our audio track here, you can see that when I put my mouse over this white line right here, this white line represents the volume level. And when I put my mouse over that, it changes to kind of a mouse pointer cursor, right? Okay. And if I click right there, it's going to put in a keyframe for however many tracks that I've selected.
Okay.
That I've armed, excuse me.
1, 2, in this case 4.
In this case, I've got 4 tracks armed. So it's going to put a keyframe in each of those 4 tracks at the exact same spot. Okay? And we don't necessarily want to do that, right? So let's go back. Let's do edit, undo keyframe. It's going to take those out of there. Okay, let's disarm the tracks that we don't want that to happen on.
I guess there were 6 armed.
Yeah, we had 6 armed, 2 video and 4 audio. So I'm going to just arm these two.
But you
audio
don't see the
tracks.
keyframe appear except for on the audio in this case. Why was that?
Because the particular line that we
was an audio
was an audio volume, and of course the raw video doesn't have
Sure.
volume. There's no volume to a video, just a plain video track. The volume is just on the audio tracks.
Okay.
There are other things on the video track, such as opacity, on the video tracks, and you can set that with keyframes as well. It's probably the closest example to volume. So, okay, so now we're back on our audio tracks. Let's say we want to start our fade here. Okay, so we can select that. Another important thing about keyframes is there is the option within Cinelerra to automatically insert a keyframe when you adjust something on the track. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to say that I want the audio to fade out at this point here. So I'm going to click that with my cursor. And then I'm going to go up to the top, and right near the different editing modes, the drag and drop editing mode button and the cut and paste editing mode button, there's another button that says generate keyframes while tweaking. So what we're going to do is we're going to click that button, and it'll highlight, it'll kind of get highlighted. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back over here to the on the left hand side where the names of all our tracks are. There's a little slider there, and that corresponds to the volume level. If you hover over it, you'll see that by default it's set at 0, which means normal, not been changed yet. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide that all the way down to as far as we can go over. In my case, that brings it to 40. But depending on what your settings are, it may be different. So I'm going to bring that over to 40. And then you can see on the timeline that actually created a curve.
Right.
That line that was straight is now curved, and it kind of goes down like that. So what's happened here is if we go back and play this, we'll hear that the volume level has actually faded out to nothing. You won't be able to hear it after that point in the video anymore. Likewise, you could go and you could make all sorts of neat curves, and the volume would go up and down and up and down.
Right.
And that's why keyframes are important. And if you want to, you can go back and hover over that point again, the keyframe that we just inserted, and you can click on it and you can adjust it that way. You can drag it up and down, and you'll notice that when you do that, your sliders over here on the left-hand side go up and down accordingly. Right. So that's why keyframes are important. And we're going to come back to keyframes in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit about the camera and the projector.
Which we talked about in an earlier episode, if I'm not mistaken.
We talked about that a little bit when we talked about the compositor window. The compositor window we mentioned was where your kind of a rough draft of what your video looks like after you add all these effects is going to look like.
Okay.
And it does a pretty good job of rendering at a high level, fades and transitions and things like that. So you can get an idea of what your final project's going to look like. So if we bring up the compositor window like that, what we'll see is there are actually several buttons on the left-hand side of that window. And if you hover over them, you'll see that one of them is for adjusting the camera automation. There's another one that says adjusting the projector automation. Now, it's a little bit difficult to describe the difference between the projector and the camera. But basically, if you think of it like a movie that's playing at a theater, in the back of the room there's a projector, right? And that's projecting the video out onto the screen. Now imagine that you had a camera in the theater, which you're not supposed to do. It's highly illegal. But let's say you're actually taking live video of the movie that's playing, and you want to put that on the internet for your friends to download. Again, highly illegal, but let's just pretend. So that camera, you're also going to be able to pan and tilt and zoom in on the projected image as well.
Right.
Okay. So that's kind of when we're talking about projector and camera, you have two ways to manipulate the video on the screen. Okay. One from kind of further back here, and another one from up close.
Okay.
Think of it that way. That's maybe the best way to describe it. So when we talk about, let's say we wanted to zoom in on a media file that we're working with, or we wanted to zoom out, or we wanted to position a window in a certain way. If we actually click on, we'll start with the projector. If we click on the projector button, where it says Adjust Projector Automation,
right,
that's going to bring up a little window that says Cinelerra projector. And what we can do, you'll see there's a set of numbers there, an X, a Y, and a Z. And what we can do with that is we can adjust, just as you would imagine, where the video is along an X scale,
right.
where it is along a Y scale, and then the Z is really for zooming in and out.
All right.
So the Z, if we adjust the Z, we'll either zoom in or zoom out. So let's say we wanted to make the track up in the corner of the window, right? Mm-hmm. So first we want to make it smaller. So let's start with the Z-axis, and it says 1.0 right now,
right.
But let's change that to 0.4. And if we do that, you'll see that it actually made the video smaller over here. Now, what we want to do next is we want to adjust it so that it's up in the corner of the screen. There's two ways to do that. You can either type the coordinates in manually with the X and the Y, or
right.
you can actually just click and drag it on the compositor screen over to the corner. That's the easiest way, really. So let's click on that, and we'll just drag that box up into the corner of the screen.
Okay.
Okay, so now we've, if we were to render this right now, that's what we would see. Not very interesting, but it's there.
Right.
Okay, so that's how you can work with both the camera and the projector. Now, what makes this fun for effects is, let's say we wanted to take that while the video was playing and move that from one corner to the other corner. This is where keyframes come into play along with projector and camera automation.
Okay.
So let's move the video from one corner of the screen down to the other corner of the screen in a matter of 5 seconds.
Okay.
Like a 5-second interval. So we've already got this here up in the top-hand corner of the screen. Now let's set some keyframes so that we know where we're starting from.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go back into make sure that the keyframe generate keyframes while tweaking is still on, and it is. And if you go look at the video, you'll see that there are keyframes in the video track that we've selected.
Right.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go down to the timeline. We talked about this last week. If you down in the bottom of the timeline, there's the middle window down there. We can put in 5 seconds,
right.
And it'll actually jump 5 seconds. Or actually, we'll put this in the leftmost window. That's the easiest one. You can see we're at a certain point right now. What we're going to do is just add 5 seconds to that, and then hit the Enter key. That's going to move our cursor exactly 5 seconds.
Sure.
And then we're going to go back to the compositor window, and we're going to drag this down to the other corner. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to put keyframes in at the point where our cursor is at.
Right.
Now, what the cool thing is, you remember that line when we were talking about audio fading?
Right.
There was a line.
It was curved downward.
Right. It's just done the same thing for us here for the video.
Oh, okay.
It's put in a curve. So what will happen is if we go back and play this, we can see that it actually is moving the video from one point on the screen down to the other point, just like that. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, very.
Yeah. So it just kind of moves it down over the course of 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. But what are these buttons over here?
Well, let's talk a little bit about masks. This little wavy rectangle thing. When you put your cursor over, it says Edit Mask.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit last time about how when you the different time, how you have the different tracks, and the first video track is viewed first,
right?
And then the other video tracks after that are viewed after that. So if there's a hole in track 1, for example, you're going to see down to track 2. Exactly.
Okay.
Now, let's say you wanted to, for example, do some, I don't know, pixelation.
Ah.
All right.
I think we've done that before.
We have done that. So let's say you want to do some pixelation. What you're going to need to do is you're going to have 2 video tracks that are identical, and we're going to set up a mask by using this feature around our
genitalia.
Yes. Or maybe not.
Or whatever you want to pixelate, for whatever reason.
Yes. So let's just keep rolling. So yeah, so we're going to use a mask to do that. So for example, another example besides that might be license plates.
I'm still stuck on genitalia.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to move over now a little bit. So license plates, you might not want to.
If you're going to cut all that, I presume. So let's start over.
We're just going to go forward. License plates, you might not want license plates to be
right when you're filming a PI movie, for example. You're making a movie about the surveillance videos.
There are some legal things about certain logos and things like that you may want
like
to.
this one.
Have you ever seen? Exactly. So we may want to actually go ahead and pixelate that out.
In fact, you already did.
So we'll show you how we did that. So what we want to do is we want to go back to the program window. Like we said, we want to make sure that we have 2 tracks. And really it can be anything else underneath that track. In our last episode that we did, we had a TV, a big screen TV sitting next to us, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a picture on the TV of the source code coming down, right?
Right.
Well, that actually wasn't on the TV. It was a mask that I did, and then I put the video of the source code underneath the top video track and just displayed that part on the TV.
I wondered how you did that.
Yeah. So let's show you. Let's do that right now, real quick. Well, maybe not real quick, but we'll do it anyway. So so we've got our track that's up top, the topmost track, which is our main track. And then we're also going to have, what you need to do is copy the exact same material down below on another video track. Okay, so we've kind of got that here. What we want to do is we want to arm the top track, and we're going to set up a mask there. So we want to disarm all these other tracks.
Okay.
Go back to the position your cursor somewhere on the timeline, and then go back to the compositor window and select the mask button on the left, edit mask. Okay, that's going to bring up another window, and what we're going to see there is mode, which is either going to be subtract or multiplied, and we're not going to get too much into this. Value, which is basically whether the mask is visible or not, or it could be partially visible, and some other things there. So what we're going to do now that that window's up, we're going to go back to the compositor, and you'll see that the cursor is now changed into a cross.
Okay, and this is where you can draw the shape of
This is where you can draw the shape. And actually what we're going to do is we're just going to put points around the area that we want to deal with.
So
and that's
polygon.
A polygon, or you can even go tetrahedral, whatever. We're going to create a number of points. And when you start placing these in here, you'll see that they start linking up together, and they create whatever shape you want to do.
And now can I adjust those?
Yeah, you can adjust them. For example, if you hold down the control key, I can
slide
actually start moving them around.
Okay.
Like that. All right, so the first thing we need to do, now that we have set our mask on the top track, is we need to go down to the bottom track, and we need to attach an effect to that bottom track that's going to do the pixelation for us.
All right.
Okay, so what we do to do that is we right-click on the lower video track, and we do attach effect. It's going to pop open a little window with a bunch of effects, and we'll talk more about these in a second. But the one that we're interested in right now is called downsample. So if you click on the downsample and hit attach, that will attach that to that particular track. And it's actually helpful to select first an area that you want to do that with, but that's okay. Okay, so we've got downsample now on the on that second track, and if we right-click on that and hit show, it's going to bring up the various options for that particular effect. And what we want to do is we want to adjust the horizontal and the vertical bars just to increase those. And what that's going to do is it's just going to pixelate the video for us. And now if we go back and look at it, in the compositor, bring up the compositor and take a look at it, you'll see that it actually is pixelated quite a bit.
Okay.
So that's the pixelation effect.
Very cool.
Yeah. So now let's go ahead and talk about some other effects.
That was the pixelation effect, but we were demonstrating a mask, correct?
Correct, yeah. So that's the way you do a mask. That's one way you can use a mask.
Okay.
The other way, as we mentioned, was to maybe just do something like put a just to let another track bleed through to the top track.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it's just creating a hole in the top track so you can see the bottom track.
All right.
And you can do that for lots of different things.
Now let's talk about text titles.
Oh, text and titles, yes. So there are a couple of ways to do text and titles. Let's do a simple title where you might just want to put a person's name, if you're introducing them or whatever.
Okay,
let's
great.
do a simple one. So to do that, let's go ahead and arm the top track again. Get off this bottom track. Arm the track that you're working with, and select on the timeline an amount of time that you want that track to be, or the title to be visible for.
Okay.
Okay. So we've just selected some by clicking and dragging, and right-click on the video track and do Attach Effect again, just like we were doing with the pixelation.
Right.
And scroll down until you find the effect called Title. Simple enough, straightforward. Select Attach, and you'll see the little bar across the bottom of the video track that says Title. What we can do there is we can right-click on that little title bar and say Show, and that's going to show us all the options that we have to work with for this title. So, for example, you can center the title, have it centered on the screen, or put it off to one side or the other side. There's also a way to position it specifically with X and Y coordinates on the screen if you want to do that. It has a built-in fade effect. I believe the default is 5 seconds or half a second, but you can change the fade in and fade out of the title to be different. Drop shadow, whether you want to drop shadow or not, you may not. And there's a speed button here, which is basically for scrolling if you want it to scroll, or if you don't want it to scroll, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Okay. You can also change other things like the title. If you want to change the title, the color, not the title. You can change the color of the title to be white or black, whatever's going to show up well against what you're, what you have on the screen at the time. And then, of course, obviously, you can change the font that you're using and the font size. So let's just stick with the defaults. Put in my name for the text that we're going to use, and then close out that window. When we go back, if we click somewhere within that where the title is on the timeline and go look at the compositor, we'll see right now, so it's in the very middle, but we'll see my name up on the screen. So that's the easiest thing to do. That's an easy way to add titles. Now you can also, there's a more complex way to add titles using the GIMP. The GIMP is one of the tools that we use a lot for the source to do the pop-up titles that we have, like a URL of some sort that we're talking about. Let's say if we're talking about our homepage, www.thesourceshow.org, that'll actually pop up and go back down. Okay. And what we've done there is we've actually taken an image in the GIMP and put that inside our project. And so going back to the layers of video, let's talk about that. What we can do is we can actually use keyframes and another video track to put in the title and make it come up and go back down by moving the projector like we did earlier.
Sure.
So we use the projector, we make it pop up, make it pop down, throw in an audio effect or two to make it sound cool, and you could do things with the GIMP. Now we also use the GIMP to do our credits in the exact same way. So our credits at the end of the show are basically one long image that's written in the GIMP, and it's 720 pixels wide by about 6,000 pixels long.
Okay.
Huge, really long image.
Very large.
And what we do is we basically put that on the screen and use the camera, not the projector in this case, but we use the camera to pan over that entire image.
Wow.
And we do it slowly, and that gives us the effect of the credits rolling up the screen.
Okay.
So, really cool way to do some really cool things with titles and credits.
Great. Okay. Now, it's the moment we've all been waiting for, the really cool effects.
Right. So, there are some built-in effects. They're called plugins. We've seen them when we talked about the titles and the pixelation and things. There's some other ones in there, and they're really simple to use. All you have to do is go to your timeline and pick an area on the timeline that you want that effect to show up.
Sure.
Do Attach Effect, and then just pick one. For example, let's pick the aging TV effect. And if we put that on, then for the length of time that that effect is on the timeline, you're going to see scratches and things come down like an old-time movie.
Oh, okay.
So you can see that now. So we look like we're in an old movie now.
Whoa, that is weird.
Yeah. So, or we can go in and make that, instead of aging TV, we can change that to be burning TV, which is another cool effect. If we do that, you'll see, we're on fire. Right. So there's fire coming up and all that kinds of stuff. Really cool stuff. The one that I really like is .tv. So we go in and pick .tv and bring that up. Now it looks like we're made out of dots.
Wow.
So
are.
yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's like we're in a M&M world or something like that, but it's all made out of dots. And you can play around with those. There are some other effects in there. Those are the simple ones. So that's something that you can see right away. You don't have to mess with. But there's also other effects in there. For example, the chroma key effect. So that's where you can actually, if you have a green screen type of effect that you want to do, you can go in there, and it's actually.
And we do.
And we do, of course, yeah. So we can make it look like we're in the Starship Enterprise, or
look at there,
something strange like that, just by changing the chroma key. And it's very flexible. You don't have to use green screen or blue screen. Those are the ones that work well. But
orange screen.
You can use the red wall behind us and put something else in behind us.
Like a picture of a giant insect about to devour us.
Yes, here it comes.
I'm not afraid.
Not really. So there are all kinds of other effects there. There are some to de-interlace video, for example. If you have interlace video, you can de-interlace it. All kinds of really cool stuff. So that's effects.
Anything else you can show us?
Not today, because we're out of time.
Oh.
But in the next...
Just getting good.
I know. In the next tutorial, we're going to be talking about where you go from here. Once you have all of your material together, you've got all your effects, your titles, your credits, it's all done. Then the next step is you have to render the video. So, and you also have to get that video ready to put up on the web or burn it to a DVD or whatever. So that's what we're going to talk about next time, is rendering and transcoding of your video.
Now rendering takes a lot of time.
Rendering takes an enormous amount of time, depending on what you're doing. If you're just if you have a small video and you're not doing a lot of compression, it can go pretty quick. Well, most of the time you're going to want to compress that video down into a smaller form factor. So that's what's next on our next tutorial, tutorial number 4.
Alright, so that was Cinelerra tutorial number 3. So hopefully you can all go out there and jump right on Cinelerra and start to use it. If you need any help, or if you have a question once you start using it, there's really good mailing lists over at cvs.cinelerra.org, and you can go check those out, and the folks there are real nice. They'll answer any questions that you have. Next time on the show, we'll probably be doing one of the projects we mentioned, either the Myth TV box or the MAME console stand-up arcade machine. We'll be doing one of those two projects on the next episode, as well as Cinelerra tutorial number 4, and we mentioned that was about rendering and transition and transcoding. If you'd like to get involved and you live in the Cincinnati area, you'd like to help out with the show, as you can see, I'm down one host, and I'm looking for another host for the show. If you live in Cincinnati, you're into open source and podcasting, and you'd like to help out, let me know by emailing me at thesourcefans@gmail.com. But even if you're outside of the Cincinnati area and you'd like to help with the podcast, we've got any number of things we can do. We would like you to do, from website, managing the website, designing graphics. The graphics on the website are a little old. We'd like to update those. Doing PR work for us in terms of getting the show out in front of more people so that more people can enjoy it. So if you'd like to do something like that, you can do that from anywhere around the globe. It doesn't have to be here in Cincinnati. So also, again, let us know at that email address. Until next time, I'm Aaron Newcomb. Keep watching The Source.